What happens when quiet authority is mistaken for weakness at 30,000 feet? A man boards a flight to Washington, minutes away from sealing a deal that could change his company forever, only to find his first-class seat already taken. The man sitting there smirks, the attendant sides with him, and the black executive holding the ticket is told to move. But what none of them know is that this isn't just a passenger they're embarrassing. It's the CEO of the very company about to decide their airline's future. This isn't just a story about a stolen seat. It's about pride, perception, and one quiet decision that grounded an entire plane. Have you ever been judged before you even opened your mouth? What would you do if you held all the power, but in that moment, nobody could see it? Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches you, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow, I have saved something extra special for you. This whole nightmare started on a quiet Tuesday morning inside Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport, Gate C-17. The air in the terminal was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and a tension you could almost taste. It was that early morning rush where everyone is exhausted and impatient. People were already filming, phones up, capturing the long lines and delays, but they had no idea they were about to capture a national headline. Marlon Richardson was on his way to Washington, D.C. He was tall, confident, and wore a simple, pressed navy blue shirt. No loud logos, no flashy jewelry. Just quiet, earned authority. He was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the Global Tech Equity Summit, a massive event. He was calm, reviewing notes on his phone, planning to use the flight to polish his speech. He was just another passenger in a busy terminal. But he wasn't. What no one at Gate C-17 knew was that Marlon was the CEO of Nexera, a tech giant that had just days before signed a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity partnership with SkyAll, the very airline he was about to board. He was their new, massive, critical partner. He knew their systems inside and out. But right now, he was just a black man waiting to board a flight. Have you ever felt that calm before a storm? That feeling when the world is quiet, but deep down it's about to explode? The call for first-class boarding echoed. Marlon gathered his briefcase and walked calmly down the jet bridge. He stepped onto the plane, gave the flight attendant a polite nod, and turned into the VIP business cabin. He walked toward his assigned seat, 2A, and that's when he saw him. A white man in his mid-40s was already sitting there. He was the picture of careless privilege. Shoes off, feet propped up on the bulkhead, a mimosa already in his hand. He wore a silver Rolex that flashed as he scrolled through his phone. He looked smug, like he owned the plane. Marlon stopped, double-checked his ticket. 2A. He was in the right place. "Excuse me," Marlon said politely. "I believe you're in my seat." The man, Mr. Sutton, didn't even look up. He just waved a dismissive hand. "Yeah, I'm not moving," he said casually, his eyes glued to his phone. "They told me to sit wherever I'm most comfortable." Marlon's jaw tightened. "My boarding pass says 2A. Can you please check yours?" This time, Sutton did look up, his eyes filled with annoyance, as if Marlon was a fly he wanted to swat. "Listen, pal," he sneered. "I'm settled. Just find another seat. It's not that complicated." The cabin, which had been buzzing with the sounds of people settling in, went quiet. People stared. They saw a confident black man in a dress shirt and an arrogant white man with his shoes off. And they waited. Imagine the feeling. Every eye in first class is on you. You have the ticket, you have the right, but you're instantly being treated like the problem. The humiliation is instant. Marlon was left standing in the aisle, a problem to be solved. He didn't argue with Sutton. He knew how this looked. He calmly signaled a flight attendant. A woman with a tight smile and a name tag that read Karen bustled over. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, looking straight at Marlon. "Yes," Marlon said, keeping his voice level. "This gentleman is in my assigned seat, 2A. Here is my boarding pass." He held out the pass. Karen glanced at it, then at Sutton, then back at Marlon. And in that split second, her entire demeanor changed. Her smile didn't just fade, it inverted. She saw the relaxed white man with a mimosa, and she saw the black man standing in the aisle, and she made a choice. She didn't ask Sutton for his ticket. She didn't check her manifest. She turned her full, hostile attention to Marlon. "Sir, "Can I see your boarding pass?" she asked, as if he hadn't just shown it. He held it up again. She frowned. There must be some mistake. This seat is clearly occupied." "The mistake," Marlon said, "is that he's in my seat. I just need you to ask him to move." "Sir," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "I'm not sure what the confusion is, but this passenger is already in his seat. We see this all the time. People get confused by the seat numbers. We're going to need you to move. I'm sure we can find you something in the back." "The back?" Marlon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I paid for 2A. A second flight attendant, Linda, appeared, standing shoulder to shoulder with Karen. They blocked the aisle. They had become a wall, a two-person embodiment of the system. "Ma'am," Marlon tried again, using standard procedure. "Can you please check this passenger's ticket? Mine is for 2A. Karen refused. She crossed her arms. "Sir, we don't want to cause a scene. This is a full flight. Please, just find another seat so we could take off." She was treating him like an imposter, like someone who couldn't possibly belong in this seat. The other passengers were staring. Some looked ashamed. Others looked annoyed at him for holding up the flight. The stares felt like invisible cages. This was the moment where a small injustice could be corrected. Instead, Karen and Linda chose to double down. Marlon's jaw tightened. He had designed cybersecurity systems that protected global banks. He managed a team of 10,000 people. He would not be moved from a seat he paid for. "I paid for this seat," he said, his voice low but carrying through the silent cabin. "I'm not moving." The shift was instant. The fake politeness evaporated. Karen's face turned to ice. "Sir," she said, her voice cold and sharp, "you are holding up the entire flight. You are refusing a crew member's instruction." She took a step closer, lowering her voice into a threat. "We will have you removed if you don't cooperate." The cabin was dead silent. This was no longer a mistake. It was a public shaming. It was a power play. Marlon, the black CEO, was being publicly reduced to a criminal threat, all while the man who stole his seat watched with a smug grin, sipping his mimosa. Marlon just stared at her. He could see the next 5 moves in his head. He knew exactly what she was about to do. Karen, seeing he wouldn't back down, reached for the intercom phone on the bulkhead. Her fingers punched the button. "This is Karen at the front cabin," she announced at the cockpit and the gate. "I have a passenger in first class who is being disruptive and refusing to cooperate. I need a supervisor of the jet bridge." Immediately, she hung up, turning to Marlon with a look of cold victory. "The gate supervisor is on his way," she whispered, a threat and a promise. "You have one last chance to move, sir." The entire plane was now grounded. The system was in motion, and all of its gears were grinding, not toward the man who'd broken the rules, but toward the man who'd dared to ask for them to be enforced. Marlon was trapped, waiting for the next level of authority to arrive and finish the humiliation. The engines fell silent, but the storm was only beginning. Every eye was on Marlon, not the man who'd broken the rules, but the one who dared to demand fairness. The system was moving, cold and deliberate, and its target was clear. He was being prepared for public humiliation, one authority at a time. The silence in the cabin was a living thing. It was heavy, judgmental, and it was suffocating. Every passenger in first class was now staring, their faces a grotesque gallery of pity, annoyance, and morbid curiosity. They wanted a show, or they wanted this to be over. They didn't see a man being wronged. They saw a delay. The 2 flight attendants, Karen and Linda, stood like guards, their arms crossed, their message clear. Marlon was the problem. He was the disruption. His dignity was an inconvenience. But they weren't the only ones watching. A few rows back, in the main cabin, a passenger named Maria watched the entire scene unfold. She had seen Marlon board, calm and polite, a man who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. She had seen the smug man in shoes off, Rolex flashing, dismiss him like he was nothing. And she had just watched, disgusted, as 2 flight attendants sided with the arrogant white man over the black man with a valid, paid-for ticket. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, building anger. She recognized this script. She had seen it play out 100 times in her own life. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. This was the system in action. As Karen reached for the intercom, her face a mask of smug righteousness, Maria discreetly lifted her phone, angling the camera through the gap in the seats. She hit record. The small red light was a tiny, digital witness in a cabin full of silent accomplices. She captured the smug, satisfied look on Karen's face as she spoke into the phone. She captured Marlon, standing alone in the aisle, his back straight, his dignity his only armor. And she captured the sound of the captain's voice over the intercom, muffled and distant, confirming that a supervisor was on his way to handle the situation. This situation, of course, was Marlon. A moment later, a new man boarded the plane. He had a gate supervisor's vest on and an expression of pure annoyance. He didn't look tired. He looked bothered. This wasn't a problem to solve. It was a mess to clean up. This was Mark, and he was the higher authority they had been waiting for. Karen and Linda visibly relaxed, their expressions turning to vindication. Their backup had arrived. This is the moment. The moment a manager is supposed to investigate. The moment they are supposed to be impartial, to de-escalate, to find the truth, to fix things. Instead, Mark became the final hammer blow. He strode down the aisle with purpose. He walked straight past Mr. Sutton into A, who was now openly smirking, mimosa in hand. Mark never gave Sutton a single glance. He didn't ask the man for his ticket. He didn't question why he had his shoes off. He didn't ask why he was in a seat that wasn't his. His eyes found the only target he had been sent for, the black man in the navy shirt. "Sir, I've been briefed," Mark said, his voice clipped and impatient. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask to see Marlon's ticket. He had already been found guilty by a jury of 2 flight attendants. "I have a valid boarding pass for seat 2A," Marlon said, his voice still steady, though the pressure was immense. Mark cut him off with a sharp, disrespectful slice of his hand. "I don't care what you think you have," he said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear clearly. "What I know is that you are refusing a crew member's instruction. That, sir, is a federal offense." The threat just hung there, poisoning the air. A federal offense. He had just turned a seating dispute into a crime. He was painting Marlon as a potential terrorist. Maria, still recording, felt her blood run cold. She zoomed in, capturing the cold, dead look in Mark's eyes. Mark leaned in, lowering his voice so only Marlon and the rows nearby could hear. It was a staged intimacy, a calculated move designed to be more threatening. "I don't know what the problem is," he hissed, "and I don't care. But you have 2 choices right now, and I suggest you make the right one." The cabin was breathless. This was the climax of the show. "Choice 1, Mark continued, is you take the middle seat I have for you in economy, and you do it quietly. You go to the back of the plane where we've found a spot for you." He let the humiliation of that offer sink in. A middle seat, in the back, from a paid VIP seat to the worst seat on the plane. "Choice 2, Mark said, his eyes now ice cold, his hand hovering near his radio, is you continue to be a problem, and I call airport security to remove you from this flight right now. Forcibly." This was it, the lowest point. In front of an entire plane, Marlon Richardson, a CEO, a keynote speaker, a partner worth $4.2 billion to their company, had just been reduced to a criminal threat. He was cornered, publicly and completely. Mark smiled, a thin, cruel line. He saw Marlon's silence as surrender. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. You have 10 seconds to decide before I make the call." 10. He started counting in his head, his stare unwavering. 9. 8. Mark's eyes were cold, triumphant. He had backed Marlon into a corner, and he was enjoying the kill. Karen and Linda stood with their arms crossed, smirking. They had won. The smug passenger in 2A, Mr. Sutton, had his phone up, clearly filming a wide, self-satisfied grin on his face. He was enjoying the show. Other passengers were filming, too, but for different reasons. Some looked ashamed, staring at their laps. Others, however, looked openly annoyed, not at the staff, but at Marlon, the black man who was causing a scene, the man who was delaying their important trip. Their stares were just as sharp as Mark's threats. They all expected Marlon to finally break. They expected him to yell, to curse, to plead, or to do the slow, humiliating walk of shame to economy. They expected him to be powerless. They needed him to be. Instead, Marlon didn't get angry. He didn't get loud. He got cold. He got controlled. This wasn't a brawl. It was a chess match, and they didn't even know the rules. He let Mark count. 7, 6. The numbers echoed in the stale air. Marlon held up a single, calm hand. The gesture was so assured, so devoid of panic, that Mark, surprised, stopped his countdown. "Are you familiar?" Marlon asked, his voice quiet, but it had an edge that cut through the entire cabin. "With Skyall's contract of carriage, specifically Section 4B, subsection E?" The question landed like a brick. Mark, Karen, and Linda froze. Their smug, victorious expressions didn't just fade. They evaporated, replaced by a blank, confused, almost stupid stare. This was not in their script. They were airline staff, but they had probably never read the document Marlon was quoting. They were the authority, but they didn't know the law. "What?" Mark stammered, his authority instantly fracturing. The redness in his face wasn't anger anymore. It was confusion. Marlon pressed on, his voice like surgical steel, calm, precise, and utterly ruthless. "Section 4B, subsection E. The policy regarding involuntary downgrades for confirmed boarded passengers. It states, very clearly, that a passenger cannot be downgraded after boarding is complete without their consent, unless it's a matter of safety or security." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked at Karen. He looked at Linda. Then he locked his eyes on Mark. "A double-booked seat is a gate issue, not an in-flight one. He looked Mark up and down, "have just admitted I am not a safety threat, or you would have called the air marshal, not airport security. So, I ask again, on what grounds are you threatening me with a federal offense for occupying the seat I paid for? Or," he added, "are you just making it up as you go?" The power dynamic didn't just shift, it shattered. The other passengers, the ones who had been annoyed at Marlon, were now staring at Mark. The man with the uniform, the man with the radio, had just been exposed. They expected Marlon to yell. He quoted their own rulebook. They expected a problem. They got an expert. Mark was completely wrong-footed. He was just a gate supervisor. His power came from a vest and a walkie-talkie. He was used to bullying tired, frustrated passengers, not debating corporate policy with someone who sounded like a corporate lawyer. He tried to recover, to puff himself up again. I don't care about Section 4B, he scoffed, his voice betraying his rising panic. He was floundering. "I care about operational necessity." "That's the rule, sir. Operational necessity. And you're not operating with us." It was a pathetic, desperate grasp at a corporate buzzword. And it was a full confession. He was admitting it. He was admitting, in front of everyone, that the rules didn't matter. Only his power mattered. "Sir," Marlon said, his voice dropping, a final, cold warning. "You're making a mistake." "No," Mark snarled, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. He was humiliated, and now he was dangerous. "You are. I'm done with this." He fumbled for his radio, his hands visibly shaking. "I'm calling security. Last chance. Get off my plane." But what Mark didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the plane wasn't the only place this was happening. As Mark was threatening to call security, a few rows back, Maria was uploading. She had heard the threat of security and, forcibly, she had the 60-second clip, the perfect, undeniable loop. Marlon's polite question, Karen's dismissal, Mark's threat of federal offense, and the smug, shoes-off white man in the background, untouched. Her hands were shaking with rage, but her fingers were steady. She wrote the caption, "Racist staff at Skyall at DFW threatening to remove a black passenger from the first-class seat he paid for while giving his seat to a white man. This is disgusting. Hashtag Skyall racism at Skyall." She hit post. The video didn't just go online. It ignited. The internet didn't just see it. It inhaled it. It was shared before the app even refreshed. Within the first 30 seconds, it had 1,000 views. A major activist in Chicago, one with 2 million followers, saw it and retweeted it with the caption, "This is what corporate racism looks like. This man is being threatened for existing while black in first class." Hashtag SkyAllRacism. Make them famous. The video exploded. In minutes, it wasn't 1,000 views. It was 100,000. Then 500,000. It was shared by a celebrity, then a news anchor, then a pro athlete. The airline's social media page, which was just moments before posting about fall travel deals and friendly skies, was engulfed in a tidal wave of fury. It was a digital army, and they were mobilized. Thousands of comments, all with one hashtag. Hashtag SkyAllRacism. The social media team at SkyAll headquarters in Chicago didn't know what hit them. The entire mentions feed was a wall of red, angry face emojis and the same 60-second video playing on a loop. The video of their own employee, Mark, threatening a black man with federal offense, while another white man sat smugly in his seat. A junior analyst saw it and felt sick. We have a problem. Just post the standard, we're looking into this macro, his manager said, not even looking up. No, you don't understand, the analyst said, his voice rising. It's trending. In the U.S. We're number one. Above the World Series. The alert was escalated. It went from the social media team to the communications manager to the director of PR. Phones started ringing off the hook. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and then it landed on the screen of Cynthia, the senior vice president of operations. Cynthia was a shark. She was a crisis manager. She didn't panic. She moved. She saw the video, and she didn't just see a PR problem. She saw a lawsuit. She saw the hashtag SkyAllRacism and felt the blood drain from her face. That was a brand killer. That was a stock plummeter. This is a code red, she said, her voice tight, already on her feet. Shut down the comments. Give me the manifest for DFW Flight 901 to D.C. Gate C-17. Now, a terrified assistant handed her the printout. Cynthia scanned the first-class cabin. Her finger traced down the list. She saw the seat at the center of the storm. 2A. Her eyes scanned for the name. M. Richardson. Cynthia's blood ran cold. The name was familiar. Too familiar. It was a name she had seen in budget meetings, a name attached to their biggest new project. It couldn't be. She raced to her computer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She typed the name into her corporate directory. The profile loaded, and the room started to spin. It wasn't just M. Richardson. It was Marlon Richardson, CEO. Nexera. Cynthia dropped the tablet. It shattered on the floor. Oh my God. The CEO of SkyAll, a man named Henderson, was in an all-day budget meeting, arguing over fuel costs. He was irritated when Cynthia burst in, no knock, her face ghost white, holding a cracked tablet. Sir, we have a code red, she said, her voice shaking. Henderson looked annoyed. What is it, Cynthia? I'm in the middle of projections. Whatever it is, use discretion, manage the experience. Give them a voucher. A voucher won't fix this, she said. The video. The one at DFW. The one that's about to cost us our brand. Henderson waved it off. It's a passenger dispute. They happen every day. Give him a $500 voucher and have security deal with him. Cynthia was shaking her head, tears of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. Sir, you don't understand. That man, the man our staff is threatening to have arrested, that's Marlon Richardson. Henderson's face was blank. The name meant nothing to him. Who? Marlon Richardson, Cynthia said, her voice barely a whisper. The CEO of Nexera. Henderson's smile froze. Cynthia took a breath. The $4.2 billion cybersecurity deal. The partnership we just signed last week. The one that saves our entire fourth quarter. That Marlon Richardson. The color drained from Henderson's face. The pen he was holding snapped in his hand. The panic was absolute. This wasn't a PR problem. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was a financial catastrophe. This was an extinction-level event. The $4.2 billion deal wasn't just a deal. It was their lifeline, their future, their defense against a hostile takeover. And their minimum wage, maximum arrogance employees were, at this very second, trying to have the man who held their company's fate in his hands arrested. Get me on the phone with that crew, Henderson roared, grabbing his own phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely dial. Give me the pilot. Give me Mark. Get me someone on that plane now. The CEO of Skyall, Henderson, was roaring into his phone from his Chicago boardroom, his face a mask of purple rage. But on the plane, nobody could hear him. The world of Skyall corporate headquarters and the world of Flight 901 were still two separate, sealed-off universes, and the gate supervisor, Mark, was about to cause them to collide in the most catastrophic way possible. Mark was furious. He was sweating now, the recycled air suddenly hot and suffocating. He had been publicly humiliated, his authority questioned by a passenger, his operational necessity, bluff called in front of an entire cabin. His face was blotchy and red, his hand shaking with a combination of rage and adrenaline as he fumbled for his radio. He couldn't let this problem win. "I'm done with this," he snarled, his voice a low, vicious hiss that was far more threatening than a yell. He was done trying to be polite. "I don't care about Section 4B or 10Z or whatever you're babbling about. I'm calling airport security. You have 1 second to get off my plane." He raised the radio to his mouth, his thumb pressing the talk button. The small click of the button was a promise. This was it, the final move. "Don't bother," Marlin said. The words were so calm, so devoid of fear, so final they stopped Mark cold. His thumb froze on the button. The radio crackled with open static, an unanswered call. Marlin didn't even look at Mark. He didn't look at Karen or Linda, who were watching with vindictive anticipation. He turned, slowly, and reached into his briefcase, which was still resting on the seat in the row behind him. His movements were not rushed. They were deliberate, smooth, and economical. He moved like a man who had all the time in the world, a man who was not a prisoner, but a king. He pushed aside his summit notes and took out his personal phone. The cabin was so quiet, the sound of the phone unlocking with a click echoed in the silence. It was the same sound Mark's radio had made, but it held infinitely more power. The passengers watched, breathless. What was he doing? Calling his lawyer? Calling the police to report them? He looked too calm for that. He wasn't. He was calling his office. His real office. He tapped a single name on his speed dial. The entire plane, now dead silent, could hear the faint of the phone ringing on the other end. It was answered on the second ring. Marlin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke in the calm, controlled, boardroom voice he used to move markets, to build empires. "Yeah, it's Richardson," he said. The entire plane was listening. Every ear was strained. Karen and Linda stared, their faces a mix of confusion and a new, cold dread. Why wasn't he pleading? Why wasn't he scared? Mark's radio was still in his hand, forgotten, the static hissing. Marlin paused, listening for a beat. The voice on the other end was faint, professional. "Yes, I'm fine," Marlin said. "I need you to do something." "Correct. Terminate the Nexera-Skyall partnership." The words Nexera and partnership meant nothing to the crew, but the tone was everything. Marlin listened again. The clause? 12.1. Breach of public trust. He looked up and let his eyes drift over Karen, then Mark. "That's the one. Send the notification. Now, and route all inquiries to legal." He hung up. The click of the phone locking was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. He slipped the phone back into his briefcase, zipped it, and placed it calmly on the floor. Then, and only then, did he look up at the 3 employees who had sealed their company's fate. He looked at Karen. Her mouth was half open, her brain still trying to process the words. He gave her a faint, cold smile. "You'll understand soon." The confusion on their faces was total. They were still trapped in their small, metal tube, high on their small, meaningless power. They had no idea that the world had just changed. They were still trying to figure out what just happened, but they were about to find out. Because someone else on the plane did. At the exact moment Marlin's call ended, a phone buzzed violently in seat 2A. It wasn't a gentle chime. It was a frantic, vibrating panic, an electronic scream. Mr. Sutton, the smug passenger, the man with the Rolex and the mimosa, looked down at his phone with annoyance. His smile was still on his face, enjoying the show. He was still watching Marlin, expecting security to finally drag this guy off so he could get his next drink. He glanced at his screen. The smile didn't just fade. It was ripped from his face. It was as if he'd been shot. The text was from a name he knew better than his own. The name that signed his paychecks. The name of the CEO, Henderson. The text was all caps, a digital scream. What did you do? Get out of that seat. Get out of that seat now. Call me. Call me now. Sutton's face turned from smug pink to a pasty, grayish ghost white. The mimosa slipped from his fingers, crashing to the floor, splashing his shoeless feet and designer slacks. He didn't even notice. The cold, sticky liquid puddled around his socks. His hand was shaking so hard he almost dropped the phone. He looked at the text. He looked at Marlon. He really looked at him for the first time. Not as a problem, not as a disruption, not as some black guy, but as a man. A man in a simple navy shirt. A man named Richardson. And in that instant, his brain, addled by arrogance and morning alcohol, finally made the connection. The fragments of memory from a dozen boring corporate meetings and all-hands emails suddenly clicked into place. Nexera, the new partnership, the massive, multi-billion-dollar contract that was going to save the airline. The name of the CEO, Marlon Richardson. Richardson. He looked at the man in the aisle. He looked at the text. What did you do? You. Sutton stammered, his voice a dry, rattling croak. You're Marlon Richardson? From Nexera? Marlon didn't answer. He didn't have to. He just held his gaze. A cold, steady, silent confirmation that was more terrifying than any yes. Oh my God, Sutton whispered. He didn't just get up. He fled. He scrambled out of the seat as if it were on fire, tripping over his own feet, knocking his own briefcase into the aisle. He was a panicked animal, desperate to escape. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He turned on the three frozen employees. He, their regional manager, their boss, was now a cornered rat. And he did what all cornered rats do. He turned on his pack. His voice was a high-pitched, cracking shriek, an animal sound of pure terror. What did you do? He screamed, his face contorted. He jabbed a shaking, accusing finger at Karen and Mark. What did you do? He pointed at Marlon. Do you know who that is? The cabin was in chaos. I'm the regional manager for this airline. Sutton shrieked, announcing his identity, his complicity, his failure to the entire plane, to all the recording phones. And you just cost us everything. Everything. You're fired. You're all fired. This was the moment. The instant, crushing, beautiful weight of accountability. The blood drained from Karen's, Linda's, and Mark's faces. It was a visible, physical thing. Karen's hands flew to her mouth, a silent, horrified oh. Her eyes, which had been so cold, were now wide with pure, undiluted terror. Linda began to tremble, her hands shaking, and then she just started to cry, silent, terrified tears. And Mark just stood there, his radio clattering from his numb fingers, hitting the carpet with a dull thud. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life, his career, his house, his car, his future, burn to the ground in 30 seconds. The other passengers gasped. The person recording, Maria, zoomed in, her hand steady, capturing this entire, beautiful, horrific reversal of power. The whispers in the cabin became a roar. What did he say? He's the manager? Who was that guy? Nexera. Cost them what? More phones came out. The click, click, click of recording buttons was the only sound. And then a new sound, a sound that cut through the chaos like a diamond. A phone was ringing. The entire cabin flinched. It was Marlon's phone. He calmly, slowly, reached back into his briefcase. He pulled out the phone. He didn't have to look at it for long. He held it up, angled just enough. The name on the screen was bright and clear, visible to Mark and Karen in the aisle. Caller ID. CEO Henderson, Skyall. The call that Mark was threatening to make to security, was now coming from the CEO to the man Mark was trying to arrest. This was the final move. The checkmate. Marlon looked at the ringing phone. He looked at the now empty, mimosa-soaked seat 2A. He looked at the three frozen, career-dead employees in the aisle. Then, with a cold, devastating, and beautiful finality, he pressed the silence button on the side of his phone. He sent the CEO of Skyall to voicemail. The plane was grounded. The victory was total. But the reckoning was just beginning. The act was so final, so cold, so powerful, that it sucked the last bit of air out of the cabin. Karen, Linda, and Mark stood frozen, their careers flashing before their eyes. The regional manager, Sutton, was hyperventilating, his face a sickly gray, his designer slacks soaked in mimosa. The entire cabin was a sea of glowing phones, all pointed at Marlon, all recording. Marlon Richardson said nothing. He calmly reached down, picked up his briefcase, and with a small, polite nod to the other passengers, turned to leave the plane. He didn't run. He didn't storm off. He just walked. He deplaned as calmly as he had boarded. As he stepped into the jet bridge, a new sound came from the plane's intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. This flight has been canceled due to an operational necessity." A groan of frustration erupted from the cabin, but Marlon never looked back. He walked up the jet bridge, expecting to see the airport security that Mark had threatened to call. But the men waiting for him at the gate weren't in police uniforms. They were in $5,000 suits, their faces pale and slick with panic. One was the general manager of the entire DFW airport. The other was a frantic Skyall executive, Cynthia, who had raced down from the corporate lounge. "Mr. Richardson," she called out, almost running toward him. "Mr. Richardson, I'm Cynthia from Skyall Corporate. Please, a terrible, terrible mistake. We are so." She was stammering, at a loss for words. "Please, sir," the airport GM cut in, his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Not here. Please. This way." They didn't escort him to security. They didn't escort him to the public gate. They personally walked him through a private, unmarked door, down a quiet hallway, and into the ambassador's lounge, a hidden VIP room reserved for diplomats and billionaires. The room was silent, all polished wood and soft leather. And on the far wall, a massive television screen was on. The face of Skyall's CEO, Henderson, was already there, waiting via an emergency video call. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. He was pale, sweating under the studio lights of his own boardroom. The second he saw Marlon, he started talking. "Marlon, Mr. Richardson, sir, I cannot apologize enough. I am just horrified, appalled. This is not who we are. This is not what Skyall represents. This was a random, isolated incident. A failure of experience. Please, what do you want? A lifetime of free first-class flights? 1,000,000 frequent flyer miles? We'll donate $1 million to your charity. Please, let's just talk about the next deal. We can fix this. Just name your price." He was begging. He was trying to buy his way out. If this was you, what would you do? Would you accept the apology? Would you take the money, the lifetime of free flights? Or would you ask for something more? Marlon stood in the center of the lounge, his briefcase in his hand. He let Henderson's desperate, rambling plea hang in the air. He let him sweat. Finally, he held up a single calm hand. Henderson immediately stopped talking. "Mr. Henderson," Marlon said, his voice as cold and quiet as it was on the plane. "Stop. This isn't about an apology. And it's not about your money. I don't want your miles." He set his briefcase down. "This is about your system. Your system is broken. It's rotten. It empowers people like Karen and Mark to humiliate passengers based on the color of their skin, and it protects people like Mr. Sutton. You're not sorry this happened. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it was me." Henderson started to speak. "No, that's not." "I'm not finished," Marlon said. Henderson flinched and was silent. "The next ordeal is dead. That is not negotiable. That is the $4.2 billion price for your operational necessity. That's your education. My team," Marlon continued, "is currently drafting a press release about why we terminated the partnership, and it includes the video Maria posted. That video now has 5 million views. It's the #1 story on CNN. Your stock is in pre-market freefall. The deal is gone. What we are discussing now," he said, "is the price for me not personally suing your airline into the Stone Age for racial discrimination and breach of contract." Henderson was white. He could barely breathe. "You have 1 hour to agree to 3 terms, Marlon said. 1. The immediate public termination of all 4 employees involved. The flight attendants, Karen and Linda. The gate supervisor, Mark. And your regional manager, Mr. Sutton. Not suspended. Not retrained. Fired. Today. Before my original flight was scheduled to land. 2. You will fund a full, independent, third-party audit of your company-wide bias and de-escalation training. And the results, all of them, will be made public. And 3, Marlin said, you will establish a $10 million fund, managed by my foundation, to provide scholarships for Black students entering aviation and technology fields. He looked at his watch. The Nexera deal is what you lost. These terms are what it costs to save what's left of your company. You have 1 hour. My private jet is being refueled. The airline didn't have a choice. The internet was on fire. The brand was toxic. The stock was plummeting. They were in full-blown catastrophe mode. It didn't take an hour. It took 45 minutes. Before Marlin's original, canceled flight would have even landed in Washington, D.C., the news broke. A formal press release from Skyall hit the wire, announcing the immediate, for-cause termination of 4 DFW employees, including a regional manager, for a complete and total failure to comply with company policy on diversity, inclusion, and passenger respect. Marlin's legal team immediately drafted and sent over a new document. The airline signed it without a single change. The press, and later, the company, would call it the Nexera Accord. It was a new company-wide policy on passenger rights. It stated, in plain English, that a valid, confirmed, boarded passenger could not be involuntarily moved for another passenger's comfort. It established a zero-tolerance policy for bias with real, immediate, career-ending consequences. The power, for the first time, wasn't just with the uniform. It was with the passenger. Marlin sat in the private lounge, watching a breaking news alert on the TV confirm the firings. His new flight, a Gulfstream G650, was waiting for him on the tarmac. He had won. He had forced a change. But as he watched the faces of Karen, Mark, and Sutton flash on the screen, he knew this wasn't the end. He still had a summit to attend, a speech to give. And now, the entire world was watching. But what happens to people like that, to a man like Sutton, when their power and privilege are stripped away in a single, public, humiliating moment? The true fallout, the human cost of that $4.2 billion lesson, was just beginning to be why the time Marlin's private Gulfstream jet touched down in Washington, D.C., his story wasn't just a viral video. It was the #1 headline in the world. It was on every terminal screen, every news ticker, every phone. The hashtag #SkyAllRacism had been replaced by hashtag Marlin Richardson and hashtag Nexera Accord. He had left Dallas as a passenger. He arrived in D.C. as a movement. He walked into the Global Tech Equity Summit, and the air was electric. The organizers, who had been frantically calling him, rushed to meet him. Mr. Richardson, your speech, the incident. The speech is fine, Marlin said, his voice calm. He walked past them, onto the massive stage, in front of thousands of people and dozens of news cameras. He stood at the podium, looked at his carefully prepared notes for his keynote speech, a speech about cybersecurity and market trends, and he slowly pushed them aside. He looked out at the silent, expectant crowd. I was supposed to talk to you today about tech equity, he said, his voice echoing in the hall. But I learned more about equity and power this morning than I have in a 30-page slide deck. He told them the story. He told them about Sutton's shoes-off arrogance. He told them about Karen's dismissive middle seat in economy. He told them about Mark's threat of a federal offense. And he told them about the phone call. He became a symbol, not of wealth, but of quiet power, of dignity, of using the leverage you have, not just to reclaim your own seat, but to change the entire system for the people who will come after you, the ones who don't have a $4.2 billion deal in their pocket. His story proved what so many of us know. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power. It's a reminder that racism isn't just about feelings. It has a cost. And he had just handed the world a receipt. Months passed. The Nexera Accord was adopted by other airlines. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by new outrage. Marlin was back in his office at Nexera, running his company. Then a letter arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a physical, handwritten letter on cheap stationery, the kind you buy at a drugstore. The return address was a simple apartment in a suburb he didn't recognize. It was from Sutton, the former regional manager. Marlon opened it. The handwriting was shaky. Sutton was a broken man. He had lost his job. His career in aviation, a career he had built over 20 years, was over. He was, in his own words, toxic. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Karen or Mark. He apologized. He apologized for his arrogance, for his entitlement, for his privilege, and for his abject failure to lead. He said he had watched the video, the one Maria took, over 1,000 times, and every time he was sickened by his own smug face. He just wanted Marlon to know he was right. Marlon read the letter twice. He could have thrown it away. He could have felt the cold satisfaction of justice. But he saw something else. He agreed to a private meeting. They met at a nondescript coffee shop. Sutton didn't look like the man from the plane. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled polo shirt. The silver Rolex was gone. He looked older, tired, and humbled. He could barely make eye contact. "I don't expect anything," Sutton said, his voice quiet. I needed to say thank you." Marlon was confused. "Thank you for what?" "For firing me," Sutton said. "For showing me what I had become." And in that moment, Marlon didn't feel anger. He didn't feel revenge. He saw a chance to fix the root problem. He saw an opportunity that was worth more than a scholarship fund. "I don't want your apology, Mr. Sutton," Marlon said. "I want your story." Sutton looked up, confused. "I will forgive you," Marlon said, leaning in, "but on one condition. Skyall's new bias training program, the one my foundation is auditing, I want you to be the keynote speaker." Sutton's jaw dropped. "Me? Speak? What would I?" "You," Marlon said, his voice firm, "will stand up in front of every new manager this company hires. You will tell them your name. You will tell them what you did. And you will be the one to explain to them, in your own words, exactly what a $4.2 billion mistake looks like." 1 year later, a corporate training room at Skyall's new headquarters. It's brightly lit, all glass and brushed steel, designed to look transparent, progressive. A group of new gate supervisors, flight managers, and first-class attendants are sitting in ergonomic chairs, coffee in hand. They're here for the mandatory passenger dignity and accountability onboarding. They look bored. They're expecting a slideshow. Then, the lights dim and the main screen flickers to life. It's not a slick corporate production. It's grainy, shaky, filmed on a phone. The audio is blown out, but it's clear. We see Mark, his face red and contorted, jabbing his finger at an unseen man. We hear him threaten, "That, sir, is a federal offense." We see Karen, standing behind him, smirking, her arms crossed in victory. We see the smug, shoes-off entitlement of Mr. Sutton, his feet up, his mimosa raised as if in a toast to the humiliation. A woman in the training class gasps. She recognizes the video. They all do. The video cuts. The screen goes black, and then a new image appears. It's a simple close-up shot of a man on a bare stage, under harsh, unforgiving lights. He's in a rumpled polo shirt. He looks older, tired, and profoundly broken. It's Sutton. "My name," he says to the camera, his voice quiet, hoarse, was Robert Sutton. "I was a regional manager for this airline for 20 years. I had stock options. I had a $200,000 salary. I had authority." He looks down, his hands twisting in his lap. "And on a Tuesday morning at DFW, Gate C-17, I was arrogant. I was entitled. And I was a bully. I was in a seat that was not mine. I was asked to move, politely, by the man who had paid for that seat. And I refused, because I was comfortable. I felt powerful. And he was just a black man in a dress shirt. The new managers are no longer bored. They're sitting bolt upright. I watched," Sutton continues, his voice cracking, "as my staff, my team, a team I trained, threatened that man. I watched them try to downgrade him to economy. I watched them threaten to have him arrested." He looks up, his eyes finding the camera, and they are wet with a shame that is a year old but still raw. "And I did nothing. I filmed it. I grinned, because I knew the system would protect me. I knew the uniform, the title, the operational necessity would side with me, the white manager over him the black passenger. What I didn't know, he says, was that the man I was filming was Marlon Richardson, the CEO of Nexera, the man who held a $4.2 billion contract in his hand. My comfort, he says, using bitter air quotes, was more important than his dignity. That single 10-minute failure of character, that single act of prejudice, cost this company $4.2 billion. He is the new face of their training. He is the living case study. He is their ghost of Christmas future. The video is now a permanent, mandatory part of Skyall's business school curriculum, titled simply The Cost of Prejudice. The culture at Skyall is fundamentally different. It's not perfect. You can't erase a rot like that overnight. But it's changed. The Nexera Accord, the policy Marlon drafted in that VIP lounge, is now the industry's standard for passenger rights. It has been adopted by two of their biggest competitors, who were terrified of their own Marlon Richardson moment. The Accord is printed in the back of every in-flight magazine. It is posted at every gate. It is the new law. And the scholarship fund, the $10 million fund Marlon demanded, it just sent its first 50 students to college. 50 new pilots, engineers, and tech leaders, many of them black, many of them from neighborhoods that planes only fly over, who will one day build a better system from the inside out. One of them, a young woman from Compton, is quoted in Forbes saying, "I read the Nexera Accord story. I'm not just here to fly planes. I'm here to change the cockpit." Skyall stock did recover. It took almost the full, agonizing year. It only recovered after the third-party audit was published, a scathing 200-page report that detailed a systemic and pervasive culture of bias. It only recovered after Henderson, the CEO, publicly apologized, not for the incident, but for the culture I allowed to grow. It only recovered after they proved, publicly, that they were committed to the change. Accountability, it turns out, is profitable. But this story was never just about a bad day. It wasn't about Karen's smirk, or Mark's threat, or even Sutton's arrogance. It was about a system that was built to protect them. A system that is trained, day after day, in thousands of quiet, unseen moments, to see a black man in a Navy shirt, even in first class, and instinctively label him as the problem. A system that sees a white man with his shoes off as comfortable. Marlon had the one thing that could shatter that system. Power. Hidden power. The power of a $4.2 billion deal. The power to make them listen. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's the question that keeps me up at night. What happens when a man in that aisle isn't a CEO? What happens when he's a teacher? A plumber? A student? What happens when he doesn't have a single, world-changing phone call in his pocket? How many stories do we not see? How many people, every single day, are forced to take that middle seat in economy, their humiliation silenced by the roar of the engines? How many people are just broken by the system, their dignity just another operational necessity in someone else's quarterly report? Marlon's single call didn't just cancel a contract. It held a mirror up to a rotten, arrogant culture and forced the entire world to look. It proved that dignity has a price tag, and in this case, it was $4.2 billion. In the end, Marlon Richardson didn't just reclaim his seat. He looked at the system that tried to put him in the back of the plane, and he rewrote its power dynamic at 30,000 feet. And that's how a quiet CEO, a smug manager, and two biased flight attendants proved that the most expensive thing an airline can carry is prejudice. These stories are everywhere. And most of the time, the person being humiliated isn't a CEO. They don't have that one phone call that can change everything. If you believe that everyone's dignity matters, whether they're in first class or the last row, then help us build this community. Like this video to stand for respect. Share it to prove that prejudice always has a cost. And subscribe to join our movement as we continue to uncover the stories that must be told.